Summer is a lovely period, and it brings for the angler the halcyon days when all freshwater fish are in season. Now, the early part is usually dry and hot, but as the season progresses, my eyes are turned to the skies in the hope that rain will come and bring with it those magical, damp, misty days when the rivers and lochs are full of sea trout and angling holidays in wild places are about to begin. But we must savour every moment of it. This is the early part of summer. It's hot and it's still. It's a time of pearly dawns and twilights which extend deep into the night. And my thoughts now turn to those fish such as the carp and the bream, the perch and particularly the tench, which to me are the very essence of summer fishing. It's 4 a.m. and a classic June morning on one of the lakes at Nostell Priory. Hardly a breath of air disturbs the surface of the water, and the inhabitants of the lake turn on a spectacular display. This is the best time to fish for tench, for by midday it can be unbearably hot and bright. Local fisheries manager John Osterfield is well acquainted with the feeding habits of tench, and he's carefully prepared a couple of fishing spots for us. John, advanced preparation and careful pre-baiting of a swim, although it's not essential, it is recommended, and everybody has their own ideas on how to set about it. How have you gone about it?
About 2 days ago, I cleaned out all the weeds in front of us, and I started pre-baiting with sweet corn and bread. I put sweet corn in mine, and I've put some bread in yours.
What's the purpose of that, John?
Hopefully to hold a few fish in long enough feeding so we can catch one or two.
Yeah, well, I think we are going to catch one or two, John. I don't know about you, but I think the weather conditions are pretty good today.
Yes, they're very good today.
Well, I'll get on and see you later. There's little time to lose. In a few short hours, the sun will be at its height, forcing the fish to take cover in the reeds. So John's already set up his rods. On this one, he's ledgering with a medium-sized weight. This runs freely on the line and holds the bait close to the bed of the lake. Coarse fishing's been responsible for more innovations in both techniques and tackle than any other branch of angling. This bite indicator, or monkey climber as it's known, is a prime example. The line loops round a plastic clip, and this rides up a metal rod when a fish takes the bait, which today is coloured sweet corn. I'm using good old-fashioned bread crust as bait. Its extra buoyancy allows you to fish it in such a way that it floats clear of the muddy bottom. I suppose my method of catching tench is very traditional, though I must say over the years it's accounted for some excellent fish. The main habitat of the tench is in still or very slowly moving waters that have got a muddy bottom. It actively pursues its food during the warmer months, but it becomes fairly dormant when cold weather descends upon the water. It's a very shy fish. It spends most of its time rummaging around amid the mud and the ooze, looking for small worms and insect larvae that form much of its natural diet. And it's also a handsome and sporting fish, and it's worth all the effort required to catch it. For the moment, it's just a case of sitting and waiting. However, despite all our technology, there's still a trick or two to be learnt from the locals. But as so often happens, things are quiet for a long time. Then, when you least expect it, you get a bite. Well, well, my word, what a run. It's still going as well. Oops, turn it round. Managed to turn it just short of that reed bed. I want to steer it out. It's a tench. Isn't that marvellous? And there it is. What a lovely fish. Beautiful tench. Golden colour underneath, olive green on the back. This beautiful crimson eye. And this marvellously large tail. A fish of about 3 pounds. Absolutely lovely. Well, let's get this fish back. Hardly touch it, turn it round, and away you go, little fellow. It's early July and a severe drought hangs oppressively over the nation's waterways. Rivers are reduced to trickles and water temperatures have risen to dangerous levels. So I've climbed high into the limestone hills of the Yorkshire Dales in search of cooler conditions. I'm on Malham Tarn, where I've come to fish for perch. Well, we've got an almost perfect day today for perch fishing. A good strong southwesterly breeze is creating a beautiful wave across the surface of this water. And after weeks and weeks of heat and dryness, that's very important, because this wave is putting oxygen back into the water. The heat had taken a lot of the oxygen out of the water, and that was making the fish very distressed and lethargic. But this breeze today will improve fishing considerably. The perch is a cruising, hunting fish, and being a predator, it feeds largely on other small fish. But it's also fond of water snails and aquatic insects, which it finds in abundance amongst the weed beds. Now, the perch in this lake average about 1/2 to 3/4 pound. 1.5 pound fish here is good, but in some places they can get as big as 3 or 4 pounds. But in order to catch a fish of that size, you need to know the water very well, and you need very great persistence. Perch like fairly deep water. It can take some searching out, but having found the fish, you can expect good sport, especially if you offer them a well-presented worm. I've kept the worms in moss for several days, and that toughens them up and brightens the colour of them. And I always just pop them into a little bit of sand before I bait up, because it makes them easier to handle, and you can get the hook in more precisely. The worm is a universal bait for perch, and it's the only one that's allowed at this particular lake, although the trout fishermen do sometimes catch them on their well-sunk artificial flies. Now, you have to fish the worm about 1 foot off the bottom, and you need to keep the worm on the move. On that particular tackle, I use a very large balsa float. That bobs up and down with the waves and keeps the worm going up and down underneath. Whereas on this tackle, I'm using quite a slim porcupine quill float, and I keep the worm moving by occasionally drawing it in. You usually find that you'll get most of your perch bites within sort of 10 or 20 seconds of having cast in. As the worm drops through the water, it proves very attractive to the perch. Fish. Ah, good one as well. It's running quite deep, is it? Oh yes, what a fish. They're tremendous fighters at perch. Once they feel the hooks, they do everything they possibly can to get into the weed beds around any underwater obstacle. Trying to get in the weeds there, but try and keep it out. I think it's about ready for the net now. Tremendous fight, but it's a bit tired now. First one of the morning. handsome fish. Very deep-bodied, beautiful olive green along the back with these black stripes down each side. It's very rough scaled as well, white underneath and these gorgeous orange fins. It's also got a very large mouth, which you would expect on a fish that's a predator. But the most distinguishing feature of this fish are the two dorsal fins. That one, which is quite large and has spines on the top, give you a nasty jab, can those, and the other one here, and the combination of those two gives that fish great agility. It can turn very, very quickly, and that's necessary in a fish that hunts for other fish for its food. It's now early August and my sea trout fishing is about to begin. Now the sea trout is a migratory fish that, like the salmon, divides its time between saltwater and freshwater. But it's not a separate species of fish. It's a brown trout that for some reason or another has decided to go down the river to the sea to feed before returning to spawn. Now why some brown trout do this is not clearly understood, but I suppose that once having done it, the offspring of those fish have an ingrained desire to repeat the process. And the main runs of sea trout arrive in our rivers in early summer, and to witness the sight of a shoal of sea trout waiting to ascend the river is an exciting prospect. One of the best ways to catch sea trout in a river is to fly fish for them at night. This is the River Lune. It boasts one of the finest runs of salmon and sea trout in England. But when darkness descends, this river will begin to look and feel very different. Fishing during these beautiful short summer nights can be very productive. But before you start, it's important to realise the dangers that darkness can bring. Now, I like to look at the water in the daytime. It gives me a chance to look for those features such as steep banks and deep pools and underwater obstructions that could cause me problems later on. And I also bring with me plenty of warm clothing and hot drinks, for the period after midnight can be bitterly cold. But if you act sensibly and take precautions, fishing at night can be exhilarating. And if you don't know the water, it's wise to fish with a friend. Barry Davis is an expert game fisherman and a splendid companion. Hello, Barry.
Hello, Derek.
Isn't it a beautiful evening?
Lovely.
Night sea trout fishing ahead, it's magical. But why are we fishing for the sea trout at night?
Well, as you know, Derek, they're very, very shy creatures. It's been bright and sunny all day. The river's been low for many weeks. The only chance we've got, really, is to fish after the sun's gone down.
Because it is dreadfully low, isn't it?
Oh, it's as low as I've ever seen it.
So you've got great experience of fishing on this river, and what size of flies should we be using in these very low water conditions?
Smaller rather than large. I think
Yes.
we've got less chance of picking up the weed, and there's an abundance of weed at the moment.
Yes. Right, I'll go and tackle up, Barry, and I'll see you later.
OK, Derek. Bye-bye.
Dusk marks the moment when fishing can finally begin. But for Barry's faithful Labrador, sleep beckons. An infrared camera presents a view of the river in total darkness, and a rare look at nighttime fishing, sometimes with strange results like this effect produced by the heat from my eyes. But it shows us scenes the angler himself can never see. Well, these very low water conditions are forcing me to fish in a very unorthodox way for sea trout tonight. Normally I'd like to be down the other end of this pool at the tail where it tumbles over into the next pool, because down there the water gradually gets shallower and shallower, and it's there that the sea trout like to lie. But because the river is so low and so weedy, when I tried fishing down there, every time I cast, my flies came back entangled in weeds, so that's hopeless. So I moved up here to the head of the pool. This is where broken streamy water is coming in from the pool above. The reason I've chosen to fish here is that I'm hoping that this streamy water is introducing some new oxygen into the pool, and hopefully that will stimulate any sea trout that might be here. Now, apart from the low water conditions, the night's perfect. Warm and still. There's quite a bit of fog about, but it's not the cold, clammy fog that puts the fish off that you get in the autumn. Now, I can remember fishing in conditions like this many, many years ago, when we caught sea trout on a dry fly at night. It's a very large dry fly, what we in the North Country call a bustard. It's an imitation of a big brown moth, and it had the great advantage that because it floated, it kept totally clear of the weed. Well, I'm not going to try that tonight.
This is probably the most testing of all forms of fly fishing for sea trout. Most people find handling a fast sinking line, even during the day, very, very difficult. At night, with no visuals to help you at all, it's an extremely demanding and painstaking operation. The whole thing is done by feel and by touch. We've had one or two fish splashing here earlier on. Let's hope we can pick one up.
One of the great joys of fishing at night is to have the company of another angler. But a word of warning, choose your companion wisely. You want someone that will tackle up with you at the start of the evening, have a cup of tea with you halfway through, and congratulate you on your catch at the end. But if you pick a chatterbox, your fishing throughout the whole night will be completely ruined.
Just had a little touch there. And another one. We have a bit more activity. Oh, I thought it was all gone quiet. And here we have a fish. Sea trout. It's a reasonable size. Coming up the pool towards me. Have the net ready and waiting. There we go, into the net. That's a nice fish. Lovely. That's a very good fish, about 2 pounds, maybe 2.5.
The arrival of dawn allows the angler to sit back and gather his thoughts. For me, that's essential, particularly after a fishless night. But Barry's exceptional skill has brought its rewards. Barry, good morning.
Good morning, Derek.
What a splendid fish.
Lovely. Made the whole evening worthwhile.
Yeah, fresh from sea trout?
Yes, it's a few sea lice on it, but I think it's been in the estuary for a while.
Well, that's absolutely splendid. I'm so pleased for you.
Any luck yourself?
No, fly is untroubled.
Oh dear, never mind.
You can't win it all the time.
That's right, put mine down to beginner's luck.
Well, this is almost the end of a very long journey, but it's the beginning of my annual Scottish adventure. For each year in the middle of August, I come here to fish. This is Sutherland. It's a magnificent brooding wilderness of mountains and lochs and sea. And the fishing for trout and salmon, and particularly sea trout, is at times almost beyond imagination. Almost all the rivers in northwest Sutherland connect a loch or a series of lochs with the sea, and this one is a classic example. It flows out of a loch about a mile inland, tumbles down this steep valley and goes straight into the sea. There's no tidal estuary here, and the salmon and sea trout wait in the bay, tasting and adjusting to the fresh water. And eventually a high tide will lift them into the river, where they'll move very quickly upstream, almost without stopping, until they reach the safety of the loch. Journey's End, the tiny, remote west coast village of Scourie, a place where time stands still. And in the hotel, after dinner talk inevitably turns to the subject of fishing.
This has occasionally come into my mind, that the flies we are using today, by and large, are totally different from the flies that were used 30, 40 years ago. way back. We used to, the wash hand basin, the wife washed before she went to bed, and then you took it over to soak your gut cast, because the revolution of nylon, the terrific changes.
The discussion goes on into the night, but not before tomorrow's fishing beats have been allocated. It's all highly organised, and this board controls fishing for the following day, which for me means the legendary Loch Stack, well known for its large sea trout. All the sea trout fishing here is done using artificial flies, and these broadly divide themselves into two categories. Firstly, the traditional wet flies, fished 2 or 3 to a cast below the surface of the water, and usually having some gold or silver incorporated in the design. And secondly, the dapping flies, large bushy flies designed to float on the surface of the water. On the bigger lochs like Stack, a gilly is essential. Today I'm accompanied by George Falconer. It's a large wave, George, with almost hardly any wind. It must be blowing up at the top end of the loch. And
we're getting to about the worst part of the loch now. Just front and Stack there.
Yes, through the gap there.
We get the worst part of the wind under wave. Yeah. Sometimes it can go flat calm, just a storm in minutes.
Yes. This method of fishing for salmon and sea trout in lochs is called dapping. It originated in Ireland, but it's now used extensively throughout the west coast of Scotland. And providing you have a good strong wind, it's a very productive method. It's also very simple. The tackle you require is a rod, some floss line, and some large bushy flies. And the method of fishing is this. There's no casting involved, so it's quite simple for a beginner to pick this up quickly. The wind simply takes the floss line and the fly out, and the skill is in working the fly along the top of the waves, through the water, covering as much water as you possibly can. And that large fly skittering along the surface excites the sea trout and causes them to rise. Now, you won't hook every one that you rise. Probably 1 in 8 is a good average, but it does make sea trout become very, very active. Now we've got the wind coming more consistently from one quarter. It does enable you to fish this very large fly, the dapping method, over a vast amount of water. You see, I can cover the water almost from this side of the boat right round to the other side, and that means it's covering a great number of fish. How much does this lot rise, George? Is it quite a lot if it rains?
Yes, the rain up here can be sometimes very torrential, so it can raise 1.5 feet in a day, overnight.
What, the lot can go up 1.5 feet?
Yeah.
Right, well, that's a lot of water, isn't it? And that's just what happens. Heavy rain falling on and off throughout the day transforms every feeder stream into a raging torrent. By mid-afternoon, the level of the loch is a good 2 feet above normal, and our chances of catching a fish disappear with the deluge. The following day sees me on nearby Loch Moor. Anglers are allowed to take out boats here without a gilly, as fishing's confined to small areas at either end of the loch. One of the great problems for anyone fishing these lochs for the first time is to find out exactly where the sea trout lie. Local people have great knowledge. As a general rule, any point where a stream or river enters or leaves the loch is very good. Shelving gravel banks, the areas around islands and weed beds all hold fish. You want to be fishing in about 15 to 20 feet of water. If you stick at it and persevere, well, eventually you'll find the fish. Strong winds can cause a boat to drift too quickly. So when fishing alone, I usually let out a drogue. It's a sort of underwater parachute that slows the boat down. With the weather conditions today very blustery and squally, the wind is veering from one direction to another. I've chosen to fish traditional wet fly, leave the dapping rod alone, possibly until later. Now what I've got on is a team of 3 flies, fish just below the surface with the top fly on the cast, just tripping along through the waves. You need a fairly long rod to be able to do this properly. And I like to just send my cast out, just let it sink, and then slowly trip it back through the waves with the bob fly just bobbing in and out of the water as it comes back. And then you can just roll cast it forward and you get out about 10 yards of line, and that's quite sufficient. I think all sea trout fishermen understand that the sea trout itself is a very, very shy fish. And as you've already seen in rivers, we creep and crawl about in the middle of the night to try and catch them. But up here it's quite different. The sea trout can be fished for during the day. They don't display the same amount of shyness. You've got to be careful, but they're not as shy as they are in rivers. And the reason for this, well, I think it's the amount of water that they've got to move about in here. In a river, they're very confined. Up here, they've plenty of space. And with a very short river running into the sea, all they've done is exchange a saltwater sea for a freshwater sea.
The weather in August is notoriously unpredictable here, and it's something the angler really has to come prepared for.
People at the other end of the lake are saying, I'm glad I'm not up there now.
Time's getting on, but at least the afternoon brings better weather. A steady southwest wind's now blowing, and there are signs that the fish are becoming active.
Oh, missed it again. Oh, got it. Oh. Don't think this is a very big fish, but it's a sea trout. It's a nice. They fight under the boat. It's coming up again. Thought it was only a small fish to begin with. Sometimes they're very deceptive. Oh well, sea trout of about a pound. Well, it's the end of a blustery, changeable day, but at least I've caught a sea trout. And there it is, what a magnificent fish. It's losing some of its silver colour because it's been in the loch for a few days. But what a lovely shape, and this magnificent large tail, so typical of sea trout.
This year's Scottish adventure will be over all too soon. By the time I return home, cooler weather will have brought the first signs of autumn. And with it comes the golden season of freshwater fishing.
And we shall be joining Derek Law for Autumn at the same time tomorrow.